triumphal entry of Jesus into Jerusalem.
You went ahead of the screen.
And I want to start first by showing you this painting. I'm not an art aficionado, and if anybody's an art aficionado and you recognize it, just hold back a little bit. But I'd like you as a class, individuals, tell me, what do you think that scene is about?
Hey, Greg.
I'm sorry?
Hey, Greg.
Yeah.
That TV just a little bit.
Yeah.
It's like this.
Yeah. Yep.
There.
That better?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
What is that painting telling you? What's your understanding? Take a shot at it. There's no right or wrong. Rich.
It may not be, looks like they're jockeying for position
Jockeying for position.
in the kingdom.
Okay.
That's a wild.
Yes.
Plotting something.
Sorry?
Plotting something.
Plotting something.
Do they have the coin? There's coins on the table.
Coins on the table.
They're kind of. It looks like.
Gambling, maybe?
Yeah.
They're
not dressed in disciple clothes.
No, I'll get to that.
Not dressed in disciples.
These sleeves is accusing of the guy that's leaning over the table,
So it looks at some
sort of defeated.
kind of an accusation or accusing.
Argumentative, but he look like argue.
Yeah.
Arguing, an argument going on, okay?
Is that Judas with his coins?
Is that what?
Is that Judas with his coins presenting them to the?
Judas with his coins. Anyone else? Okay, I'm going to leave you wrestling with that, and we'll come back to it a little later. I just wanted to provoke you a little bit with that. And the question is, what do you see? And we've heard different people seeing different things. So if you forget everything that I say this morning, what I'd like you to leave the class with is, what do you see? Because the question is, what did they see in the triumphal entry of Christ into Jerusalem? The people who were there. And we'll get to that. But okay, so I passed out, and if you don't have it, there are extra sheets here. Greg, you could help me. Sure. Okay.
Do I need one?
The entry is drawn from all four Gospels, speak of the entry. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And there are, the episodes of them. I just want to point out, and the theologians and the New Testament scholars argue over a lot of minutiae. We're not going to do that today. That's what they see. So, for example, it says Jesus, the disciples and the crowd, this is Matthew's column, went to Bethpage from Jericho. Mark says they went to Bethpage and Bethany from Jericho. So there's a big theological argument about that, the difference between Mark and Matthew. That's what some of the New Testament scholars see. Luke says Bethpage and Bethany from Jericho. John says from Ephraim, no instructions for the disciples. I'm just showing you some of the minutiae, I call them, differences. And many books have been written on some of these differences. Or fetching the donkey. Jesus sat on both simultaneously. That's what Matthew is saying. I can't figure how that could happen. A colt and a donkey. Mark says Jesus sat on the colt. Luke says Jesus sat on the colt, and John doesn't say where he sat. Another difference there. And then finally, Mark says, blessed is the coming kingdom of our father David. Luke says the Pharisees were angry and they said, rebuke your disciples. And Jesus wept over Jerusalem. John says the Pharisees told each other, this is getting us nowhere. And of course, earlier in the chapter of Matthew, they actually say, and we'll come to that, we had enough, and they started plotting to kill him, which happened 5 days later on Friday evening when he was crucified. The one common thought is this has to have happened. All four Gospels speak about this entry. The significant thing about the entry is what happened that week? What did they see? From Sunday to Sunday, what happened? Who are the characters in this story that played? And what story did the characters tell themselves? I would like us to spend a little time talking about that. So, think a little bit with me. Let's start with who are the characters that are mentioned in this story? I'm sorry?
Jesus.
Jesus,
Disciple.
the disciples, the crowd,
Donkey.
okay, the Pharisees, anybody else?
Children.
Well, they were children.
We're crowds.
Yeah, I have the crowd. Children. Judas, sorry, Tim.
It says in Desire of Ages that a lot of the people that he healed were there. It doesn't say that.
Yes.
Context.
The people who he had healed.
Lazarus was there, and
Lazarus was there.
Lepers.
I'm going to call them patients, former patients. And I'd like to say that among the disciples, clearly Judas was there too. Now, the question that I'm asking is, what did they see? So think about it for a moment. This is the first time Jesus is acknowledging public recognition. He's not saying keep quiet about it or anything. So what do you think the disciples, as a general group, interpreted this event to be? What did they see?
Declaring himself king.
He's declaring himself king. The kingdom of David is going to come.
Fine.
And they're going to establish supremacy over the Romans. That was the general unspoken assumption. That's what they saw, Tom.
They all thought they were going to have a key role in the thing.
They all thought they were going to have a key role in the kingdom. In fact, if you remember in an earlier part, the two boys were arguing. Their mother went to say, can they get a nice position when this kingdom begins? They were not thinking about a kingdom in heaven. They were thinking about at last, we're going to overthrow the Romans and we're going to be in the kingdom. And Israel will once more be where it is, the head and not the tail. That was the general perception of the disciples. It was the general perception of the crowd. Where were the Pharisees? What were they thinking? What were they seeing?
There are too many people giving adulation to.
This man is a pain in the neck. We need to do something about it.
Right.
So it was a threat to the system. And as far as they were concerned, they were going to lose their prominence, and he was misleading these people.
I was impressed how Jesus cried when he saw Jerusalem. So that's what he saw.
But Jesus saw a different thing, obviously. So the point I'm trying to make is, as we read the scene, different people interpreted it differently and told their own story. Not unlike the picture I showed you, how we looked at it and we told different stories about the picture. And the challenge we all face in life, in our daily life, is what do we see when we encounter an experience, when we see someone, when we notice a person's behavior, when we reflect on our own behavior, what story do we tell ourselves? And I'll play with that a little later. Let's just stay with the story they were telling themselves. So,
Well, the only ones who saw it triumphal were the disciples.
exactly.
So the Lord wasn't really triumphant at all.
Christ saw a different thing. He saw a broken Jerusalem. He was weeping over it. And they were seeing this is the beginning of a new age. Two different stories. And Judas was telling, I'm sorry.
Sorry, the crowd saw him as king.
Yes.
Because it says, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, even the King of Israel. So
The crowd saw him as king too.
Just to add to that, the crowd was they were the followers, and they were probably the ones that were inspired by him. Jesus had healed them, and they had heard many stories that I think the crowd gave it a lot of punch in that movement.
Since we brought up the crowd, I'm sorry.
That it was triumphant because it fulfilled prophecy and it was his chance to say. So, from that perspective, it was very triumphant.
But they were interpreting triumphant differently.
Well, through the eyes of Yeshua and the eyes of God, it was very triumphant.
So as we talk about the crowd, there's another debate. 5 days later, they're saying that same crowd, or is it a different crowd, that's saying, crucify him, spare Barabbas and crucify him. Same crowd that was chanting Hosanna 5 days later was singing a different song.
At that point, Desire of Ages say that it was the devil or the demons or whatever that was in the crowd chanting that.
Well,
Something like that.
but my point I'd like to make is the fickleness of human beings.
Yeah, even Peter.
The fickleness of rich.
I believe there was two different crowds.
You think?
Different crowds. The common people or not the Pharisees were all over, What they didn't understand was Jesus was trying to say his heavenly kingdom. Not many people pick that nuance up.
Right.
I don't think the people waving branches and whatever were the same people.
You don't think so? There are some commentators who have that same position that you just advocated. And it's a decision that hasn't been settled one way or the other. Was it the same crowd or were there two different? Clearly, the Pharisees were not enthralled by the whole experience. And in fact, that sort of set the clock working. And there is some argument that people inspired by the Pharisees are the ones that actually influence the people to say, crucify him. The fickleness of human beings. Now,
Sorry. Wasn't it just a few days before this that Jesus had raised Lazarus from the dead?
yes,
So there's this among the Pharisees, there must have been this is escalating. It's getting out of control.
it's getting out of control because I lumped him with patience. Actually, this is the guy who, in fact, Simon the leper had a party for him that weekend before, where the woman washed his feet with the oil, and essentially he was healed. And they had a celebration just that weekend, Saturday probably of the week. So there was a record, and so they thought this kingdom would come, and this king will actually be healing, and people will be well, and wasn't going over very good with the Pharisees and the existing church leadership. In fact, Matthew says earlier, it's not in the verse there, they plotted to kill him. That was like, this is the final straw. We have to do something about this man. Now, in the midst of all of that, this guy was not exactly happy about how things were going, and he rationalized. He told his own story. You know what? He says, Christ is too humble. I got to force him a little bit to declare himself. So he rationalized. That was his story. He went and said, I'll identify him to the priest. But his rationalization for doing it was, he'll force Christ's hand, and he'd have to show them who he really was. That was his story he was telling.
That struck me when I was reading it this morning again. Through this triumphal entry, it says Jesus went at the temple and walked around and looked at things, and then he went back out in the country to Bethany. And Judas must have said, "Oh, this was your moment. You're blowing it."
You're blowing it, so let me force it. That was his rationalization. Very often when we're doing something that violates our own values, we have to find a way to create a rationalization, to tell ourselves a story that makes us feel good. And we'll talk about Judas a little more. Let's just talk quickly about the week. The Sunday to Sunday. So the first weekend, they were at Simon, the former leper's house. They were celebrating Christ. And some commentators say it was Mary Magdalene who washed his feet. Judas objected to the waste of money, if you recall, in doing that with a very precious ointment. And then on Sunday, he had this entry that we're talking about into Jerusalem. Monday, the cleansing of the temple. He walked in and said, this temple is not made up to run business and operations, threw over the tables. Tuesday, he cursed the fig tree because it had promise of fruit, but only leaves. It was a metaphor that showed God's disappointment in the children of Israel, blessed with everything, but they bore no significant fruit. Wednesday, he went up to the Mount of Olives and taught. Thursday evening, the Last Supper. Gethsemane, betrayal. Friday, the trial, crucifixion. Sabbath in the grave, and Sunday, the resurrection. That's a week. All of this is compressed in that week. So we talked about the story. So let's come back to our picture. There's a picture. That painting was done by an Italian painter, Caravaggio. And it really is the painting of Christ inviting Matthew to join the apostles. The pointed finger, see. I don't know if I can make this work. It's not working. Okay. So I'll just point it out. This is Christ. And he painted the hand, copying Michelangelo. God's hand calling Peter. This is supposed to be Peter. Matthew. And he's saying, who, me? Are you calling me to be an apostle? Now remember, Matthew was a publican. Think for a moment if Russia overran America and they had Russian soldiers posted all over this country. And then, Tom, you'll allow me. Tom was collecting royalties for Russia. It was what a publican. And worse than that, pocketing quite a bit of it himself in the process. Matthew couldn't believe that Jesus. So Matthew's story was, who, me? Are you calling me to be a disciple of yours? Now, as with everything else, some people say, this is who Christ was calling. Most authorities say, Matthew himself that was calling. The point I want to make is everything we see, we interpret based on our experience, our life, our story. But that is generally the interpretation. It is the calling of Matthew. That's what they saw. He was a controversial artist because he was orphaned fairly early. His mother had 5 children. He was one of the 5. His father died, and then she died. And he grew up on the rough side of town. In fact, he ended up murdering someone himself. So he was a fugitive. And he challenged the creation of art in his day because he just picked people up from the streets to paint them as his subjects instead of some highfalutin. His experience made him see the characters in the Bible and the story of Christ. And he painted many religious stories that are hanging in different churches in Europe. He was from Italy. Drawn on his experience, he saw Christ in these people of the street. In fact, in one particular painting, not this one, he actually used as a model a dead woman who was bloated, which offended the church authorities in a great way. So they had a love-hate relationship with him.
His name?
Caravaggio. He was 1571 to 1610. And it's called The Calling of St. Matthew. So here's another one. Well, that's it. So that the boxes, that's Christ's hand, as I explained.
You're hitting the button that makes it go black.
Okay. But now I've gone too far. Okay, so here's another one that we probably know. It hangs in the corporate office. It's the prodigal son. It's a Rembrandt. What's the story there? There are 3 different stories there. Prodigal son. He says, what does he say?
I've said,
I'm better off if I go back, even though he started by saying, give me my share, I want to go and do my own thing. And after he squanders it and he's eating with the pigs in the pigsty, he comes to himself, the scripture says in Luke 15, and he says, my servants are better off than I am. I'll go back and cast myself on the Father. And the parable says, it's so touching. The text says, the Father saw him away off in the distance. Those of us who are parents know what that means with the challenges that we have with our children. He saw him from a distance and he ran. Didn't even give him a chance to make his explanation. He just had compassion for his son. He was telling a different story from the son's story. And finally, if you look at the background, you see the father and the son. In the shadows is the brother who had a different story. This guy, all these years, I have served you, and you're giving him the fatted calf. That was his story. And so I play my question, what do you see? And then I want us to pause and think a little bit. Run in your mind some of the stories in the New Testament, and let's talk about them. Can you think of an example? I'm not looking for 6, but.
Well, I'm just looking later in the chapter.
Yes.
There's 2 interesting stories. Of course, there's a lot, but the story of the 2 sons.
Yes.
Who said, go and then didn't. And then the story of the farmer that had all the robberies taking place, and he finally sent his son. So they killed him to get the spoils. And it's interesting that those 2 fall right in the middle of Holy Week.
Yes.
The message.
The message. Thank you, Rich. Can you think of other stories? Yes, Tim.
Towards the end, John the Baptist, he was, killed, and this is where Jesus has had that.
Yes.
8.
When you do something, Jesus had a different set of priorities. There's a story going around in some parts of Christendom today. You join the Lord, you get rich, you do well, everything goes hunky-dory. and ain't necessarily so. It's a different story. Well, I was thinking, just to prime the pump, think of the parable of the talents. What did the one talent servant, what was the story the one talent servant said? You're a hard one. I was afraid. I didn't want to do anything because if I lost it, you probably would punish me. So I saved it. Here is yours. I'm giving you back what you gave me. That was his story. How many times do we tell ourselves a story that doesn't correspond to reality? Or Paul and Barnabas in Acts. And he says, I ain't taking John Mark with me. You could do what you want. In fact, the dissension was so strong that they parted ways. Because Paul had one story about John Mark and Barnabas had a different story about John Mark. Stories that we tell ourselves. As Paul was concerned, he was a no-good coward. He had left in the middle of the first trip, and I am not going to put up with that nonsense anymore. And I could just hear Paul because I have a little bit of Paul in me. It's interesting in Timothy, we read where Paul is in prison and he says, I have no one with me but Demas. And get John Mark and send him. He changed his mind. But the stories that we tell. I give you another one. Martha and Mary. None of them were bad. But Martha was a domestic. She's fixing the house and preparing the meals. Mary was studying theology at the feet of Jesus. And Martha couldn't take it anymore. And she says, talk to her about it. So good people can have differences. That's the point I want to make, depending on the story that we tell. And notice Christ was very kind. He didn't say, Martha, you are wrong. Martha, what you're doing is okay, but Mary has chosen a better path. Was diplomatic about the way he handled it. Didn't condemn them. Well, this week I was talking to someone whose 19-year-old son was diagnosed with a very rare cancer. Same cancer she told me that Steve Jobs died from. I can't tell you what, maybe Lauren, I don't know what it is. And he is being treated. And they have to go for one more test before they say he's in remission. But you know how it is. It's that lurking fear. And it's a 19-year-old. You never think that your children would die before you do. Here's some thought. And we have no good answer, no good story for that. And I thought of Christ hanging on the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me? There are times when we don't have a story, right or wrong. We just have a question without a good answer. So that's the biblical narrative. And those are the insights from the stories. But I want to switch. It's all right to talk about other people. And it's all right to talk about 2,000 years ago and to moralize about it. Let's talk about 2025. Let's talk about us and our stories. And so I start with this one. This is from the New York Times Magazine last Sunday. Picture on the right. It says, my husband's illness has me feeling trapped. Do I have to stay? I read a little bit, and then you tell me how you are seeing her. My husband and I have been married for decades. Almost 10 years ago, he was diagnosed with a progressive disease that affects his mobility. Though it started slowly, in the past few years, he has had a steep decline. Mentally, he's still functioning, but it has been sad, stressful, and difficult for me. I feel I no longer have a partner to enjoy activities with. My husband and I traveled extensively during our marriage. I'm grateful for that, as it is no longer possible for us to travel. I am in good health and have been active all my life. If I left my husband, I would have a more peaceful, less stressful life with more independence and less responsibility. It seems like living single again would be an immense relief, and I would probably be happier. I would like to do it. What do you hear? What's your story about this woman? And you have to be kidding, was my response. Are you kidding me? And she's asking for advice. My quandary is, do I stay or do I go?
She asked herself what would be if the situation was reversed.
If it was reversed, right? So the answer is more interesting to me than the problem.
The answer.
Because here's what the advisor says. And I thought, I say all of this. He says, well, you can't love somebody. He says, you took vows to love or cherish, but you can't interfere with feelings. And he says, I say all this because you don't describe your husband as someone you still love, even as you grieve his limitations. In your account, he emerges as a list of chores and unliftable burden, as someone whose needs have come at the expense of your own. For many spouses in circumstances like yours, the experience is different. Sorrow and devotion are both present. The caregiving can be lonely and draining, but it can also be a source of meaning. Without that sustaining love by contrast, the responsibilities of care can result in sheer depletion. And then he says, still, I'm not convinced that your only choices are to stay or to go. You could get some help. So my story as I read it was, what's wrong with this woman? And I was very unforgiving in my mind. The counselor was gentler in pointing out, I understand you're stressed, and maybe your stress is getting in the way of seeing other alternatives besides just leaving him. I merely illustrate to say, here's where we are in our daily lives, encountering individuals. What kind of story do we tell ourselves about them and about ourselves? And how do we demonstrate Christian compassion and understanding in the face of something that we might think is unreasonable? I'm just transferring us from 2,000 years ago to 2026.
I was just wondering, the first thing that came to my mind here was this year. What would she say about if that were her child? How would she respond if that were her child?
It challenges us on our values.
It's a connection that she has with her husband. I mean, when you have a connection as you do with your child, it could be the same as you have with your spouse.
Not your value system that's speaking there.
Not everybody has, and I'm not speaking from my experience, but not everybody has the same relationship with a spouse that we see as ideal. There are many people that are just existing in a marriage. They're not really in a caring, loving marriage. And so maybe this is where she's from. In other words, their marriage was not close enough to endure the hardships. I heard people muttering, this is for better or worse, for richer or for poor. That's the vow we take. Unfortunately, not 100% of people who take those vows have those thoughts. And that's, I think, exemplary of where she was. There are many options as you read the response. Respite care is a very big thing. Medicare will pay for people to come in and bathe and do things too. So we don't need to get into the details, but there are many options other than just seeing her as the only one as the caregiver.
Well, I think a basic point in so much of this particular example, Judas and others,
is the matter of self-interest. It's what I want. It's what's good for me. And then you take that to the ultimate point. If there weren't a promise of a hereafter or heaven, would we choose to worship Jesus? Or are we doing it because we are going to get something out of it?
Out of it.
Yeah.
It's a story we're telling ourselves is what. But yeah, was a hand up here? Paula, and then
I listened to that. I have a niece who's 38, whose husband is probably the last year of his life with ALS. And when I listen to this, I hear a woman who's overwhelmed, who's tired, who's, I think she still loves her husband deeply, but needs a caregiver. A lot of times will die before the person they're caring for because they don't have the rest and the respite. And I just think she's crying for help.
and she's so stressed she doesn't even think clearly.
Right.
She's depressed. That's the position the advisor takes in
Yes.
response here.
That's what I do. I mean, she doesn't word it very well because she's talking about wanting to travel and stuff like that. And yes, your dreams have changed. Everybody's dreams have changed when it comes to your children or everybody's had disappointment. Hers has just been very prolonged and that's a very stressful situation. So I just hear.
Feel sympathy.
I really do.
Yeah. Cry for
Yeah, well, first of all,
Louder.
I hear a distressed woman, which I encounter a lot in my daily experience. And and I also I question the relationship. The stronger the relationship, the more because you're not like each other, but you certainly somebody you love. Somebody we have, good experience with, good relationship with. And this happens a lot also in a marriage where the age discrepancy is big, in like 20 years difference, 25 years difference. Somebody's sort of declining and the other one's still kicking around, And yes, they express to me that they feel trapped.
I'm illustrating how we see different things. We tell ourselves a different story from what we witnessed, just like the painting.
I think that 2,000 years ago, Jesus, he saw this thinking, he was intuitive. He could read people's minds and stuff, even his disciples. But I think the principles are unchanging when he said, the two laws, I've summarized: love the Lord, heart, soul, and mind. I love thy neighbor as thyself. So that's a shift in our thinking. It's not so much about us that we are to be concerned about. I mean, we are to be concerned about ourselves, don't get me wrong, but we are to love our neighbor. How are we to love our neighbor? Well, there's many ways that we can love our neighbor, not just one way.
How we interpret it.
And how we interpret it. If we misinterpret things, we say it's stinking thinking.
Yeah. So I leave you with the question: what stories are we telling ourselves about the people that we meet and about the experiences that we have? Rich, you had
Some of us saw a real example of this in a little bit. Marty and Joanne taking care of their very handicapped son, Johnny. You saw love all the way through that process until he did pass finally at late 20s, early 30s. I mean, I just marveled at how Marty, interesting individual, of course, very focused, good administrator, how he would relate to that son. I'm sure they had their moments, I'm sure, but boy, for most of us, it was always positive. Yeah.
Well, he is mentally challenged, but physically he was trying to, I happened to have him as my patient.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the residents. He was giving help and pleasant.
So I leave you with that and move to this one. Here are two paintings. What do you see there? in those two paintings. They are paintings, one is entitled The Doctor. The one on the right is entitled The Doctor. They're both physicians. What does the painting say to you, Lauren?
On the right is Marcus Welby.
One's hands on and one's hands off.
The picture on the left is entitled The Sentence of Death.
What?
Both patients are dying. The one on the right is called The Doctor. It's actually a painting done by someone whose son died. And the doctor on the left spent the night with his patient before he died. And the medications on the table suggest how little medicine could do, was beyond the limits of medicine, but he exuded compassion and concern for the son, and the father captured it in his own painting. That was his lesson that he learned from that doctor. The one on the left is called The Sentence of Death. The patient has just been told that, sorry, Lauren, I didn't see it. The patient has just been told there's nothing more we could do. Clock is running, and he sits there shocked, staring out. He didn't expect to get that message. And the doctor, his eyes are focused on his book, on the medicine. It's not an expression of any compassion or concern. That's the message, Lauren. You've been there, Lauren. I asked you what's
on the left reminds me of my last in-person physician visit. He never took his hands off the keyboard the entire time.
Who was that?
Left, which is
we're not talking about who, we're talking about how you interpret. Aline.
On the left reminds me of who knows medicine but does not know healing.
Knows medicine but doesn't know healing. Yes.
Just the discussion of our background and our experiences dictate how we interpret things.
Correct.
And the older I get, the more I think I have no idea what I'm going through. There was an old commercial and an Advent Health, I think, did a commercial like it where people were going up and down an escalator and there were thought bubbles out, you know, like somebody's child was dying, somebody's just about ready to get married, and all these different things going on in people's lives, yet they all had a pleasant face going up and down the elevator, the escalator. And you know, it just, there are so few things that are supremely important. And we sometimes make something that's not really that important.
You're absolutely correct. Our experiences in life, our personal experiences and backgrounds lead us to interpret experiences and people differently. So I was the eldest in a family of 4 children, and my father, with his Middle Eastern background, saw me as the person who would take care of the family if something happened to him. So everything that he knew, he taught me in business, which meant he taught me how to write checks. And that's not correct. Tear it up, take another one. And till I learned to write a check properly, because that he had to pay people, etc. You have to know how to do it and to manage the account. He never fussed that I made mistakes. It's kind of like, you made a mistake, do it over. So to this day, if I make a mistake, it's kind of like, big deal. I made a mistake. Background brought me up that way. Carolyn's father, and we've discussed this, was, you made a mistake. It's a terrible thing. So she was always afraid to make a mistake. It's kind of like, honey, it's okay. We could make a mistake. Our backgrounds and our upbringing change the story that we tell.
The two paintings show the difference between empathy and the lack of empathy. The physician always tries to remove barriers, and their barrier is the desk on the left and the book. On the right, the doctor is leaning over, thinking, what else can I do? So on the level of the patient. And that's the best way to be empathetic, to show empathy, is to get on the level of the patient.
Yeah. One more, and then we'll move on. That's it. Yeah. I took these from literature. Actually, both from Harvard University. Grumpy workers serve customers poorly, with sometimes devastating results. Cardiac care units where the nurse's general mood was depressed had a death rate among patients 4 times higher than on comparable units. That's not just hearsay, that's research. Demagogues spread very different emotional messages, ones that elicit negative emotions, particularly a mix of fear and anger, the threat to us from them and the dread that they will take what we have. And what that research is showing is it's not just us telling a story, it's us influencing others in the same direction. That's us today. Pharisees were influencing that mob back there to say, crucify him, to your point, Rich. The power of our influence on others and how it shapes the stories. So it's not just past experience, it's our influence. So I got to bring this to a close. So we've talked about what we see, but I want to talk about how do we see, how do we tell the right story? And I start first with those 2 texts. Jesus said, neither do I condemn thee, go and sin no more. The Pharisees wanted to have a stone, if you recall the story. And he said, go and sin no more, neither do I condemn thee. There's a statement from George Saunders. What I regret most in my life are failures of kindness. Those moments when another human being was there in front of me, suffering, and I responded sensibly, reservedly, mildly, but not compassionately. I add, but not compassionately. And so I say, for us to see wisely and rightly, we need to practice forgiveness as one. Here's Paul. Sorry, there's another one.
Get one.
Yeah. We're missing one.
Back when.
Okay. Well, here's Paul with his story. For in my inner being, I delight in God's law, but I see another law at work in me, waging war against the law of my mind and making me a prisoner of the law of sin at work within me. What a wretched man I am. Who will rescue me from this body that is subject to death? Thanks be to God who delivers me through Jesus Christ, our Lord. And then he says, we now have this light shining in our hearts, but we ourselves are like fragile clay jars containing this great treasure. This makes it clear that our great power is from God and not from ourselves. Every one of us is made of clay. So I say, cultivate humility. Don't think that you are impervious. I have to keep telling myself that. And the other one, practice forgiveness. And finally, now we see things imperfectly, like puzzling reflections in a mirror. That's what we demonstrated here today. Puzzling reflections in a mirror. But then we will see everything with perfect clarity. All that I know now is partial and incomplete. But then I will know everything completely, just as God now knows me completely. 3 things will last forever: faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love. Yeah. Seek faith, nurture hope, and learn to love. And so, this is what I'd like to leave with you. Change it for me if you can. Cultivate humility. Practice forgiveness and seek faith, nurture and hope. Learn to love. That's how we tell the right story. And so this morning, what have we talked about? What did they see? Stories they told themselves, the triumphal entry. What do we see? The stories we tell ourselves. How do we see? The assumptions that shape our seeing and the stories we tell ourselves. And finally, I'd like to suggest the prayer that we give. I took the words of the hymn, open my eyes that I might see. Glimpses of truth thou hast for me. Place in my hands the wonderful key that shall unclasp and set me free. Silently now I wait for thee. Ready, my God, thy will to see. Open my eyes, illumine me, Spirit divine. That should be our prayer. Let's bow our heads. Greg, would you offer to us?
Absolutely. Lord, we thank you for what we have learned today. Illumine us, open our eyes. We await that infilling of your Spirit day by day. Help us to live the principles that we've talked about today, cement them in our hearts and lives, and may we live by your love day by day. Through Christ we pray. Amen.
In good New Testament language, I say, if you have a great week, go forth, see.